That's 4.5 seconds north to 100 kilometers per hour from standstill. That's faster than the V8 F-Type I drove a couple of weeks ago, and just slightly slower compared to a BMW M2 competition. That's absolutely insane from a 2.3 ton SUV. And not only is this car straight line fast, it's also quite good to drive. It handles well and it's fun to drive quickly. And I know that sounds a bit weird when you're driving a city bus basically, but I'll explain later in the video. Thing is, as fast as this SVR is, it eats up more fuel doing a launch like that than an M2 would need to do a full Nürburgring lap. And I'm not even joking on this one. This car barely goes under 10 liters per 100 kilometers on highway driving, and around town it averages around 27 liters per 100 kilometers. But honestly, what would you really expect from a near 600 horsepower SUV? Yup, you've heard me right. This car has a supercharged 5-liter V8 under the bonnet that can produce 575 horsepower and 700 Newton meters of torque. It's rather ridiculous and unnecessary, right? Especially for a car that's supposed to be a family vehicle and a long-distance cruiser, right? But that's just where the ridiculousness starts, because this car over here in this spec costs around 192,000 euros. But you know what's even more ridiculous than that? This car is not even the most expensive Range Rover Sport SVR you can have. No, that's the Carbon Edition, which will set you back another 20 grand. But you know what's even more ridiculous than that? The fact that apparently this car is good value for money compared to its rivals, like the GLS 63S AMG and the Porsche Cayenne Turbo S, which are more expensive than this car. The only super SUV that's cheaper than this one is the BMW X5 competition, but only just. But I bet you want to know a fact about this car that's even more ridiculous than the ones I've just mentioned. So here it goes. You see this car over here, right? It's basically a city bus, 5 meters long, 2 meters wide, 1.8 meters tall. This massive 2.3 ton SUV only has 4 seats. I mean, sure, it does have 5 seat belts. 3 of those are in the back, but the middle seat in the back can't be called a seat. Let me show you. Now, these are some awesome looking seats, I'll give you that, and they are quite comfortable despite the fact that they look like bucket seats, but there's only 4 inside of this car. I mean, what were they thinking?
The interior is a very nice place to be in. High quality materials all around, lots of leather and aluminium all over the place. You sit very high, a proper Range Rover driving position I'd say, and you're surrounded by screens. There's the digital instrument cluster for starters that can be configured in multiple ways, of course. It's basically identical to the one in the F-Type I drove a few weeks back. Then you have the infotainment screen that pops out of the dashboard when you start up the car, quite a neat little feature. And right below that you have another screen where you control various functions of the car, like the climate control, the seats, and some vehicle and overall settings of the car. Integrated into the screen, you have 2 physical buttons for the temperature control on each side, and finally on the center console you have the switches that control the driving mode. And there's plenty to choose from, and the configuration possibilities are endless. Press the round dial, however, and the car goes into auto mode and figures out for itself what's the best setting needed for each scenario you're in.
So this is the Range Rover Sport SVR. Let's unpack that for a second. First off, we have the Range Rover, which is the base car, if you can call a 100,000 euro plus car a base car. Then you have the Sport, which is supposed to be a sportier version of the Range Rover, and then you have the SVR. SV stands for Special Vehicles Operation, which is the department within Land Rover that builds performance cars, and R stands for racing, of course. And after driving this car for an entire week, I have real issues figuring out who this car is for. What's its purpose in life, so to speak. Never mind that engine up front, because there's a lot of super SUVs on the market right now, and there's clearly an appetite for that category of cars. The 4 seats don't bother me either, because let's face it, they're comfortable, and yeah, I don't see a lot of people driving around with 5 adults inside, so there you go. But the thing that bugs me about this car is its ride. It's harsh, honestly. It's really firm, and it's quite close to what I experienced in my M2 competition, actually. And it's so firm that if you go over a bump, when the wheel hits that bump, you're definitely gonna feel it and hear it on the inside of this car. And I fail to understand why that is the case, because this car rides on air suspension, so clearly they could have made it more comfortable, but they chose not to. But what the suspension of this car does to the handling of it, unbelievable. It's physics defying. Turn this car into a corner, floor the throttle, and it just flies, no questions asked. There's an initial whiff of body roll, of course, because this is a tall car, but then the car stops leaning, it freezes, and then it slingshots you out of that corner. The 4-wheel drive system shuffles the power to the wheels that have the most traction, and as a result there's very little understeer, and the car rotates quite nicely. Feels a bit weird saying that, especially since I'm sitting like 5 meters above the road, but yeah, this is what the Range Rover Sport SVR can do. So now that we've discussed the handling, let me tell you a bit more about the other highlight of this car, which is that engine up front. As a reminder, it's a 5-liter supercharged V8 under the bonnet that can produce 575 horsepower and 700 Newton meters of torque. And it's faster to 100 kilometers per hour from standstill than the F-Type V8 I drove a few weeks back. The engine pulls incredibly well, and there's really no point in the rev range where it tops out. And of course, while it's doing that, it also produces some of the most awesome noises I've ever heard from a car. It's the exact opposite to the V8 F-Type in that you can actually hear a lot of supercharger whine when you're on this thing. And I think that makes it quite unique in this super SUV segment. And despite this car's size and weight, it can definitely push you back in your seat when you're going full throttle. It's quite incredible. Now, I'll be honest, I couldn't really daily drive this car. The ride is just too harsh and too firm for me, and it's not really relaxing driving it other than the highway, for example. Because when I usually drive big luxury SUVs like this one, I'm used to not hearing anything that happens outside of the cabin. I don't hear any road noise, any bumps, any potholes, nothing. I just waft along the road. But in the Range Rover Sport SVR, you won't be able to do that. But beside that, this car is a fantastic machine, and even if you don't like what it represents, this car at this moment, I think in a few years' time, we're gonna miss hearing rumbles like this one coming from cars, basically. But that's been it for today's video, my friends. I really hope you've enjoyed it. Please give it a thumbs up if you have, and make sure you subscribe for plenty more videos to come.